You can't imagine how often I get asked why I decided to stop coloring my hair. I am more than happy to share with you in just a bit why I made that decision almost 7 years ago, and also my philosophy as it relates to being a woman in a very modern world who is aging. So, before we get into any of that, let me at least set the context by saying this, which I feel is really important. I have always been someone who is wildly curious about all aspects of humanity and life and questions almost everything. I take pretty much nothing for face value and decide more often than not to look at what I think, what I feel, what I believe as it relates to this cultural standard or norm that has been set in place. And what I have found is more often than not, it does not align for me. And I am willing to be someone who decides to anchor into something that feels more aligned for me. So I will share more about that in just a bit. I have always been so incredibly fascinated by and deeply intrigued with aging faces. I find aging faces to be some of the most beautiful living art in all of the world. In the same way that I love all of nature, I see us as human beings in that exact same light. We are Mother Nature. And so anything that would work against that or desecrate it or be in negative energy around something that is naturally occurring in the trees, in the mountains, in the rivers, in the people, I feel like there is so much to be learned. I feel like there's endless wisdom and stories. And so I think it's important to understand the lens by which I approach this, the philosophy I keep when I think about myself as an aging woman. The reason I have been able to be so comfortable moving through the world, I am now 51 years old, without doing any Botox or fillers, not using anti-aging cream, and no longer coloring my hair for the past almost 7 years. The reason that is almost effortless for me is because I have decided to anchor into the story that aging is a natural, beautiful, privileged part of my life. And that with that stance, without all fear removed, not fear of aging, not fear of my changing face, my changing body, not fear of dying, I don't have anything that I need to be terrified of, that I need to run from, that I need to change. There's nothing to change. There's only everything to honor and to celebrate and to notice. And so, approximately 7 years ago, when I decided to stop coloring my hair, I had been thinking about it for a couple of years leading up to that point. I was already in my, let's see, mid 40s at that point, and I was questioning why I was continuing to get my grays covered. And I'd been doing it for a few years at that point because they'd started showing a few years before that. And I think initially, I, like so many of us, was on automatic pilot. The gray started to show, and the first natural solution just seemed to be, oh, let me make an appointment and get those grays covered. It didn't seem like anything much bigger than that. And it really seemed quite benign. And then there was this day 7 years ago where I was, like many women in the salon, I was doing something on my phone. And I happened to look up And I looked up around that salon and I noticed all of the women sitting there with chemicals, toxins, mixtures, potions, dye, whatever you want to call it, on top of their head, being absorbed into their scalp, knowing and thinking right then and there, myself included, this is also being absorbed into my bloodstream. And then very quickly after that, and I think because of the years I'd already been thinking about it, very quickly after that, I linked right to the question, what am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? And just like that, without an ounce of hesitation, I never looked back one single moment after that time that realization hit me. That was the last time I ever colored my hair. I have had zero regrets about this decision. And as a matter of fact, after I left that salon and announced that I would not be coming back, and I announced it to my friends and to my family, it was this declaration. It felt like true liberation for myself. I did it in a way that felt exciting. I saw the fear on so many other people's faces, and I heard from them their fear as they asked me questions like, oh, but you're certainly going to go back at least one more time and have them kind of pull it through, right? Because it's probably going to look pretty bad while it's growing out. Aren't you afraid of that skunk line? Have you asked your husband his thoughts about it? What does he have to say? Aren't you worried you're going to be so washed out looking? Don't you think that is going to age you by about 10 years? What do your kids think about it? It was fascinating how so many of the questions were based around what other people would think about it. And what I noticed is the projection of these women's fears when they were asking me if I was worried about the line as it would grow out, if I would look 10 years older. Those were things I hadn't even thought. Because what I was paying most attention to and thinking about and excited about was who I would become in that journey. I feel like there are so few opportunities for us to become, to sit with curiosity, to watch things just happen, and be curious about the making of us in that time, in that energy, in that journey, in that transformation. And what I found to be true for myself was this: there's nothing to be afraid of. That fear has been fabricated. That fear has been sold to us by multi-billion-dollar industries that base their success on the better story of fear that they can sell you. And they have to keep working at that storyline, because when we are not living in a place of feeling less than, we can't buy these storylines that I see as so cheap and so insulting if we don't believe them to be true. So for me, I didn't see aging, I didn't see gray hair as something I needed to be ashamed of, as something that I needed to hide or cover up, or to be worthy. I did not feel that my worth was dependent on the shade of my hair. So in this time, as this was happening, as this was unfolding, and I was watching it, it took 18 months from the time I stopped coloring it until it came all the way through. And as I watched it every single morning in the mirror, I ran to the mirror. almost like a child would on Christmas morning, run to the Christmas tree because I wanted to see the new discovery. I wanted to see what other patterns were starting to come through. I was in absolute awe and wonder. I hadn't felt that feeling for very much in a long, long time. It was the same delight that I had as a little girl when I got excited about going out to ride my bike and the adventures that I would have that day, not being sure what they would be, just knowing that I would stumble upon adventures and friends, and there would be so many incredible discoveries. That was the feeling I tapped into as my hair was starting to show all of the silver strands. And then in there, I also decided that I was going to make my silver hair mean my crown, my well-deserved, hard-earned, mine and only mine, victorious as could be, crown for my wearing, for my glory, for my joy, for my representation of what it meant to live this long, to carry this much wisdom at that point in my life and beyond. I didn't want to erase or hide what was happening because even with the color on my hair, it was still happening underneath. There was no real escaping the truth of what was going on. And so I just decided I wanted to be in communion with it. I wanted to revere the silver hairs and not see it as anything to be ashamed of that needed to be in hiding. And so from that decision, it was so easy for me to step into the decision and claim that I would never, under any circumstances, ever do Botox or get fillers or use serums or creams that are anti-aging. Because similar to my hair, I feel the same about my face. No company, no toxic beauty culture in particular, could ever possibly convince me that my aging face is not one of the most valuable things that I have, that it doesn't deserve to be in its full glory on full display at all times. There's no possible way that I would ever be able to fall for something so insulting. The belief that my beauty, my value, my worth was connected to the youthfulness of my face. I can see the shallow lie. I can see how cheap and insulting those messages are. And they sadly are perpetuating every space and every place that women show up. We know we have a very serious problem when even 10 and 12-year-olds are now beginning TikTok accounts to share their get ready for school routines. I remember being a 10-year-old girl. I remember climbing trees and riding bikes and building forts in the woods behind my house. Barely ever even thinking to stop and look in the mirror, and definitely not to stop to put on cream or retinol or all of these things that are so dangerous for any skin, but particularly for young skin, developing faces. What is happening in a world where 10 and 12-year-old girls care more about going to Sephora than going to play at a friend's house? I see this as an epidemic. My 21-year-old daughter, who is now in college, tells me that so many of the women her age are getting Botox, are having so many things done to preserve their look of youth. And it's astounding to me because at 21 years old, they are in the epitome of their youthfulness. And yet they are somehow scared. Scared they're not pretty enough, their lips aren't big enough, their skin's not tight enough, their cheekbones aren't high enough. And so who's perpetuating that story? Well, we know that it is toxic beauty culture. I think that every time we buy into it, we perpetuate it as well. And so I really wanted to be a woman who chose a different narrative, the narrative that I believe to be true for all the women who went before me, for all of my ancestors whose aging faces were absolutely exquisite. I wanted to be a woman like that. I wanted to be a role model like that. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking around in a sci-fi movie. The erasure of women's faces around every corner. It feels eerie to me. And I also know that so many people will listen to this and feel shamed, will feel attacked, will feel othered. And to those who feel that way, I want to say this. Please hear underneath this message, underneath all that you are feeling and fearing, that my greater message, my greater concern is for all women. Because any campaign, any story that ever made you think that you weren't perfect just exactly how you were was a lie. And I'm also willing to hold that belief. I'm also willing to be the representation of a different storyline because I know we deserve so much better as women. We have to be able to have these kinds of conversations. We have to be able to hold a difference in opinion. Of course, everyone will always decide what is best for them. I am less concerned with who decides to get Botox or not. I'm more concerned about the message that lives deeply rooted underneath the belief that you even needed to. I am a very strong stand for women and aging. And I think we have a particular issue when we have men aging side by side with women and the double standard that is experienced. That double standard in and of itself speaks to the misogyny we have and the way we look at our own aging faces and the aging faces of other women. Pay attention to the next time you look at yourself in the mirror. What story are you telling yourself? What story do you tell yourself when you pass other women who are aging on the streets that you meet? Do you tell the story that they should really do something? They don't look so beautiful. I bet if you think that, it's a projection of how you actually think about yourself. So what if you were to begin by meeting yourself every single day in the mirror with so much profound honor? Do you think you would still believe that you're not worthy of aging? That you are somehow disposable, unimportant, less relevant? I know that we have done our work here in the world. I, particularly for myself, have done my work in the world when we no longer fear aging. I hope that this idea around fearing aging is so expelled that by the time my daughter is my age or my granddaughter is my age, that she talks with her girlfriends about this idea that women used to be afraid of aging. They used to do everything possible to erase any lines on their face, to make themselves look smoother and younger. Can you believe that? Oh my gosh, I can't believe women used to do that. I hope someday we look at that in the same way we look at the times when doctors used to tell women who are pregnant to smoke a cigarette. Smoke a couple of cigarettes every day. It will help to curb your appetite so you won't gain as much weight while you're pregnant. Similar to when they used to do lobotomies on people who were feeling emotionally dysregulated. Remove the frontal lobe so we can have less emotional dysregulation. I hope that's what we consider around aging 40, 50, 60, 70 years from now. I hope they look back at this time and are blown away the measures that women were taking to look younger. I hope that's how far we come and how much we change the storyline. But the only way we will ever change that storyline is by being brave enough to have these kinds of conversations, by being brave enough to really excavate and understand, is it in fact truly power when women make these decisions? I think there have been many campaigns that have sold women on the belief that making this decision is the most powerful choice. It's their face, their body, their choice. I am all for women being in choice. You better believe it. But I can see the difference between being in choice around my body and making a choice based on not feeling worthy because I was aging. I feel the massive divide between those two thoughts. And so if we were to step into aging as a spiritual journey, the way that I have decided to anchor in this for myself, there is so much that is possible when you are not running away from it. There is endless invitation and discovery and so much beauty. But the work will begin with asking yourself, what story do I tell about what it means to be an aging woman? You know, it reminds me often of the story of going into the woods and standing there and looking at all the trees in the forest. We don't look at an older, bigger tree and say, oh, it would be so much more beautiful if only the base wasn't so wide, if only the root system wasn't exposed and taking up so much space, if the crevices on the trunk of the tree weren't so deep. We don't say that. We look at it in all of its majesty, its power, its rootedness, and we are taken back by what that tree has lived through, by what that tree has weathered, all of the storms that have come to pass. And it is astounding. And it is beautiful. And that is what I hope for all of us. That is my deepest wish for every single one of you.